Thank you to the National Security Center here at Utah Valley University for helping us put this all on. And I'm Charlotte Siraj with World Trade Center Utah on behalf of World Trade Center Utah. Thank you guys for coming out, and thank you so much to our panelists who have a lot of good information for us this afternoon. We only have an hour, so we're going to jump right into it, and then we'll have a lot of time left over for question and answer from the audience. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jamieson Greer, who's going to be our discussion lead. So Jamieson is a partner at the International Trade Team at King & Spalding at Washington, D.C. His practice covers trade policy and negotiations, trade agreement enforcement, export and import compliance, trade remedies, and matters for the Committee on the Foreign Investment in the United States, with his clients spanning manufacturing, technology, energy, pharmaceutical, agriculture, financial and investment services, hospitality, and aerospace and defense companies. So quite a mouthful. Prior to joining King & Spalding, Jamieson was the chief of staff for the U.S. Trade Representative, where he implemented trade policy and participated in every major administration trade negotiation initiated during his 3 years at USTR, including the Phase 1 deal with China, which he talked about a little bit during our main stage, but excited to hear more about that today. And Jamieson received his BA from BYU here in Utah, and his JD from the University of Virginia, and then he has a master's in law degrees from both the Sorbonne University in Paris and Sciences Po. So I'll hand it over to Jamieson to get us started.
Sure, thank you, and thank you so much for your help in organizing this, and to the World Trade Center and UVU teams. It's been really great. Very, very happy to be back in stomping grounds where I used to be. Really happy to see UVU positioned like it is now. When I went to BYU, I was involved in Air Force ROTC, and so we were linked with UVU in our ROTC unit. And we worked a lot with the folks over here, and I've been really pleased to see the expansion. You guys have a great opportunity here at this institution. I'm pleased to have several great panelists today with diverse experience in the China market that I think can be really practical, right? So far in the summit, we've heard kind of a lot of almost, philosophical ideas about, trade with China and the China market and the China challenge. But I think this is going to be really practical, and we've reserved some time at the end for questions to talk to these folks who have really great experience. So immediately to my left, I have Darin Parker, who serves as the president and director of Parker Migliorini. Yeah, I'm like Italian. International LLC, also known as PMI Foods. This was created in a merger with the Parker family, some Brazilian partners in 2011. Darin started Parker International with his father, George Parker, in '91, and he served as general manager there from the early '90s until 2011. Before the merger, and he has built the business really from a startup to one of the world's largest food trading and distribution companies, with over 670 employees and 22 global offices. Darin has a BA in economics and Spanish literature from University of Utah, and he has 5 daughters. We were just talking. I have 4 daughters and 1 boy, but he's got 5 daughters, so he wins. And then immediately to his left, we have Jackie Molling. She's the Senior Vice President of Regulatory and International Legal Affairs at Young Living Essential Oils, an iconic Utah-based direct selling company. And there she leads the regulatory and international legal teams. In this role, Jackie and her team support the legal needs of over 20 markets around the globe. She's helped with that market expansion strategy of Young Living. She's opened 10 new markets in the APAC region, Latin America, and Europe. She earned her law degree from the Pan American University in Mexico, and her professional career has been focused on international and business law. And most recently, Jackie participated on the Women's Leadership Program of the Yale School of Management for Executive Education. And then finally, Jeremie Waterman. He is the president of the China Center and vice president for Greater China at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, headquartered in Washington. And there he executes chamber policy initiatives in China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Mongolia, and helps guide Asia intellectual property rights, financial services, agriculture, healthcare, I'm still going, energy and environment, and corporate governance, and social responsibility. And that's actually true. I have worked with Jeremie in the past, and I do still. And he really is kind of a master of all these things. And he's been there for several years. He worked at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative before, for Congressional Affairs and for Africa. He received his master's degree from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts. and he is a graduate of UCLA. So, distinguished panelists for sure. But let's jump right into it. We want to make sure that we get a good sense, both at a general level and a really specific level, of what it has been like to do business in China, what the risks and rewards have been, and then toward the end, we're really going to focus on how has that changed, really in the past few months, with COVID and all the other geopolitical concerns that we have going on. But let's start just kind of historically, and Jeremie, I'll start with you. Given your kind of broad expertise and insight to lots of different companies in lots of different industries, I mean, what has made China so attractive for foreign investors and folks who want to go and operate in China? Is it because it's just a big market and people want to sell there? Is it low-cost jurisdictions? They can go there and export, to other countries, or what is it? Why have people historically gone to China?
Great, Jamieson. Thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here. Congratulations to the university, to World Trade Center, Utah. Certainly size is a factor, and as my good friend Jim McGregor, he wrote a book about it, 1.4 billion customers, and that's certainly, the market opportunity in China has always been a compelling one, and continues to be to this day. But I think that number in and of itself doesn't explain China's allure. China, and it really undersells the many things that China has done over decades to make the market a very attractive one. And what do I mean by the many things that China has done correct? Obviously, investment in infrastructure. China has invested enormous amounts in infrastructure. It really has an infrastructure that's the envy of the world when you look at Chinese ports, Chinese airports, obviously more recently high-speed rail, road system, tremendous infrastructure, obviously ICT infrastructure, and obviously having good infrastructure, having good access to the world, having good access to the region makes China a very compelling place for many industries, for many businesses. I would say second, and we'll talk more about this because obviously this is not a black and white situation at all, and China does quite a bit, as we've heard about this morning, that is disadvantageous to foreign business, discriminatory, if you would, against foreign business. But China has also, over the years, provided a generally supportive regulatory environment. They've created a predictable environment, a stable business environment. Obviously, we're going to talk about how that's changed recently. We'll get to that later. But I think overall, if you talk to members of our organization, you heard from Craig Allen, the U.S. China Business Council this morning, our American chambers on the ground in China, they will tell you, and their surveys reflect, that China, there's always room for improvement. Regulatory transparency continues to be of concern, but China has also done a lot right in this space to create a predictable environment, particularly when you compare the environment in China with other business environments. For example, India. The final thing I'll say, and I think perhaps most important, or certainly right up there, is talent, and sort of the entrepreneurial spirit, the hardworking nature of the Chinese people. And again, obviously a tremendous reservoir, tremendous asset, obviously for China itself and China's development, but also for foreign business and the world. And so obviously China has just done a lot right in a lot of those areas, and that's compounded over many years. China, obviously, last thing I'll say just about infrastructure is that they built infrastructure to scale, right? And so along with subsidies and some of the other things, obviously, that have also played a role in attracting foreign business to China, China has been able to take advantage of its domestic market, but also build scale to serve other markets. So.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremie. And Darin, maybe I'll turn to you next. I mean, as really an operator working in the market there in China, I mean, again, it's the same question that Jeremie has. I mean, what has made it so attractive for you all?
Well, before I do that, Jamieson, I just have to say, I want to tell everybody here what an amazing job Mr. Lighthouser and Jamieson did on that phase one deal we did with China. For our company and for the beef industry, we went from exporting 0 beef a day or a month, a year, to $1 billion, maybe a little over $1 billion a month. The total export since he's done that is probably worth $10 billion. So, I mean, an extra revenue.
Can I get some of that?
Yeah, we got a cut for you. But you did an amazing job. We appreciate your hard work on that deal. It really helped the farmers. It helped our businesses. And anytime we have more market, it's better for our country. And we make the best products in the world, but if you can't get into the market, you can't play the game. So, thank you. Listen, I agree 100%. When I first started going over to China, they all had the same clothes. And I remember watching them do the development, and the development was amazing because basically China was built to be the factory of the world. They came with that, they did that at the beginning. They're building wide roads, they're building ports. I'd say, why are you building so many ports? I mean, how are you possibly going to fill these ports? They're all full today. And they did an amazing job. The other thing that businesses would come over, they have no labor problems. You have a committed workforce. These people were in poverty, right? They're hungry, they're hungry to win, right? They wanted a leg up, and they would do anything to get there. They'd work. I would go over, and I love going to China because you go to Japan, it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, nobody works. China, I could have a meeting. Saturday morning, Saturday evening, all day Sunday. Anytime I wanted to work, I could work. And so you could find yourself working 24 hours a day because they're willing and they wanted to win, right? So I look at that from when you're looking for I divide it in two places. You got onshore, offshore, right? So people going over there, we're looking for that stability, right? But the people are very nice, and the government, if there was a problem in a plant, no one was striking, okay? You didn't have those labor problems. Then look at it as a market, and originally people would say, you're going to China to sell them food? Can they buy food? But they can buy food, and they did buy food. Actually, the Chinese food's super complicated, right? It's a 4,000-year history on food. They use protein as an ingredient, not as a center of the plate type deal. And it's amazing when you go over there and you can see the weird dishes and complications that they do. So we were going over, we started, and there was nothing there. So they had no distribution trucks, they had no warehousing. It all started from the beginning. So for us, there was so much to do. And so we went there, we started trading there, then we opened distribution office there, then we opened food service business there. So it was an amazing venture. But that's what I think about, the China as a place to do business. It's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you shared that because, we've heard through the summit, including from me, some of the challenges that we face in China. But I mean, it's not just they have a big population, you want to sell these folks, but they have made it a point, they've made it a policy, and they've made it a priority to be economically successful, right? And I mean, we could learn from that, right? We could learn from that. Jackie, it'd be interesting to hear from you, what Young Living's experience has been in China as a market. If you want to share some thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So, Young Living has attempted a couple different options into looking business in China, and, all the things that we have here about the challenges, right? So I think companies right now that want to go into China, we are looking into changing the strategies. But I think something positive that China has is that they have become more flexible, right? I think you mentioned that if we were to compare jurisdictions, like your example with India, super bureaucratic, try to open an entity can take 6 months. Opening a bank account, 12 months. But China has become more flexible. For example, to incorporate a company over there is pretty simple. Of course, never at the level of the US, that you do everything online, right? But it's more simple. They allow more foreign companies to own 100% of your capital. You don't need to have a local shareholder that other jurisdictions do. So, but I do find that American companies going there right now versus maybe when you guys started your operations, we do have to pivot and change our strategies and take advantage of many alternatives that they're offering, like your cross-border e-commerce or pilots that they have with free freight zones, or those ports that that maybe at the beginning they were creating that you thought what's the purpose of this? Now is when companies can go and look at all these different alternatives.
Thanks. And Jeremie, so this is interesting. I mean, this experience is ag, commodity, food world, consumer discretionary type things. Jeremie, do you think it changes depending on the sector? how a business might view doing business in China, and if so, what might those sectors be where you might want to think about things differently?
Yeah, I think I like to, when I'm counseling companies about sort of their opportunities and their risk, because this panel is about both reward but also risk. Where you sit is really where you stand, and I think different sectors, even sometimes different companies within sectors, face different risks. They have different levels of opportunity depending on their technology, depending on what they're bringing to the China market. Obviously, as I think we've all alluded to on some level, the party and the government, increasingly one and the same, think about economic development in very strategic terms. They dissect individual industries that are important to the Chinese economy, that are important to national security, and there's just a tremendous amount of thought that goes into sort of analyzing where China wants to go strategically, and what needs to happen for it to get there. And they study not just China's needs, but also what's going on in the world, how different economies, how the U.S., how Europe, how Japan, how they are regulating their economies, regulating particular sectors. And obviously you've seen, different outcomes in different sectors. I think to stick right now with the opportunity piece, with the reward, I mean, when you look at China as an export market, I jotted down a few statistics here. If you're going to take a sectoral perspective, for semiconductors, 35% of U.S. sales, global sales in China. Aviation, largest market for U.S. exports, certainly as of 2018. Obviously, there have been headwinds tied to tensions in the relationship. Obviously, COVID in terms of drop in air travel. Nonetheless, 75% of global demand for new single-aisle aircraft out to 2038 is going to come from China. 75%. Medical devices, $7 billion annually. We've done some work at the Chamber. If you look at what a full decoupling would cost U.S. industry over 10 years, you're looking at about $500 billion, with roughly a $50 billion hit to U.S. to R&D for that industry. Obviously, agriculture. You just heard but obviously $35 billion in exports, the largest market for U.S. agriculture, and I could go on and on. The Wire China. I don't know if any of you are subscribers to that, but a terrific resource put forward by former New York Times and Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist David Barboza. He had a great chart last week showing what China accounts for profits for as a percentage of global revenue or global profits for major U.S. and foreign multinationals. For Apple, it's about 19%, Nike 19%, Micron 18%, Adidas 21%, BMW 33%, Benz 15%, Tesla over 25%, GE about 10%, and I could go on and on. So obviously, it's a very important market. It's an important market to be competitive. If you're going to be competitive in a lot of industries globally, you have to, in many instances, not all, but in many, you have to have a China play. You have to try to at least be competitive there. It's obviously getting more difficult, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more. But
yeah, no, thanks. And I think it's important, again, not to oversimplify, right? To say, well, they have a lot of folks there. They have a market we want to sell to. I mean, certainly there are other challenges. I mean, one of them probably is understanding what is the Chinese Communist Party's ambitions for development, right? I know in my work, as I talk to clients who talk about investing in China or expanding to China or getting out of China or a mix of those things, we always try to make sure that they understand the whole, the whole panorama of risk and reward. So Jeremie, I'd ask you maybe just for one more minute, just to maybe comment on how companies should be thinking about, well, the Chinese Communist Party isn't letting me operate here out of the goodness of their heart. Like, what exactly do they want? How should that inform?
Well, look, if you're in a highly regulated or strategic sector where the party has an interest in ensuring self-sufficiency, if not something more. And there are industrial policies in play in your market. If there is cyber theft, forced tech transfer, all the things that we've talked about over the course of the morning, you obviously, those things are all knowable. I mean, the good news, obviously those risks are there. Those challenges are there. They are knowable, they are quantifiable, and they can be mitigated. Obviously, the most extreme form of mitigation would be not to do business. If you think the risk is such that, you know, it's just not worth it. It's better to keep your crown jewels out of China. You know, that's obviously, that is a calculation some companies make, but overwhelmingly, companies, you know, I think today go to great lengths to understand the risk, obviously more so than ever in the wake of COVID, which I hope we'll talk about, and Russia, Ukraine, and what's just generally unfolding in China. But I think, you know, again, I think the panel is very appropriately titled about risk and reward. And if you are in one of those regulated sectors, if you're in a Made in China 2025 sector, you probably face a higher level of risk. And then the final point I just make is that Chinese industrial policy and sort of strategic planning unfolds differently in different sectors. So whereas in semiconductors, you may face one set of risks, you know, the policy approach of the government may be quite evolved and far along. Perhaps in biopharma, you know, because of the nature of that industry, because of the difficulty in producing drugs, because of the health and safety factor, perhaps they're moving more slowly. So I think you really have to look from the perspective of your industry and your company, obviously what you're bringing to China. Obviously you have to, you know, Chinese consumers are also, of course, very, very sophisticated. So if you're in the consumer sector, you have to be mindful of, you know, is there a good fit between what you're offering and Chinese demand?
Yeah.
Hopefully that helps to explain.
Yeah, no, thank you. And, you know, Darin, you touched on, you know, the Chinese employees' work ethic and that kind of thing. I'm just curious, are there other kind of human resources challenges that you face in China?
Well, yes, there's definitely human resource challenges that we face in China. The Chinese employees are very good at some things and probably not as good at other things. I think when you're running a business in China, it's super important to have your operations, first of all, you need to build your operations. This is not a market you go wing it, right? You need to go to experts, you know, KPMG, you know, use a bank that has a lot of experience like HSBC. Go in there with people that can help you do things compliantly. Because remember, every country has their own rules. Washington has their rules, Beijing has their rules, and you have to meet both of the compliance rules. So I think what's important with China, what I've experienced and what we've experienced at PMI, is that left to their own devices, they probably won't do it the right way. So you have to go A, B, C, D. And if you have standard SOPs, you're going to get things done. But then you have to check and make sure that we're doing it the right way. And a lot of this isn't because they're trying to do something wrong. They're trying to do something more quickly, and maybe you find that at home too. But I find that there's other issues culturally, and I think it's important when you go into a market you understand the culture, because the culture also helps you understand the business culture. So, for example, you might have during the Chinese New Year, you have the red envelopes, right? So you have a salesperson out selling to somebody, and then he gives them a red envelope full of a lot of money. You know, we would look at that in the Western world and say, hey, that doesn't sound right. I mean, you're getting bribed. You know, you've got to be able to know what to worry about and what not to worry about. The other thing is I'll give you an example. You have to protect your businesses a little bit differently. He's been talking about espionage, but I have a plant that went out and is selling beef, and they had this Imperial Valley beef. It was out of Brawley, California. And they went to a trade show, and some guy went up and took a picture of it, and he says, you know what? I'm going to take and get the trademark for this beef. Well, about a year and a half later, he's come and said, hey, cease and desist, you owe me money because you're infringing upon my trademark. This guy doesn't even know what a cow looks like, right? And anyway, so there's a lot, you know, and when I would talk to my staff about that, it was just the perception. It's not illegal to do that in China. That's the way it works. And that was considered to be a savvy businessman. Now, I would say he's a scoundrel, but this guy's, it's just a different way of thinking. Because it is legal, it's not illegal. And these people didn't do their job properly because they should have gone in there and done the IP, the intellectual property immediately, right? But they didn't. So you learn things as you operate in the market that help you. But there's a ton of things you have to do, and you just have to do it the right way. And you have to be consistent. So we've had examples where we've had problems in our operations where we had to go and close them down and bring them back up again. I have my CFO up here, Steve. He spent countless weeks with our controller next to her, she's right next to him, trying to figure out what happened and how we can relaunch when we were doing our food service. And I remember Steve told me, my CFO here, he said, Darin, I don't think we can make this distribution thing work here. But with time and with patience and with diligence, we were able to take the business. It's a huge business today. But it takes time and it takes effort. And there is risk.
Yeah, no, thanks. We heard earlier, and maybe it was from you, Jeremy, mentioning that the regulatory regime is relatively stable and good for business. At the same time, we know in the past few years there's been a flurry of new laws and regulations that affect broad swaths of economic operators. We have the national security and cybersecurity laws, where the government is essentially saying you need to be able to provide us with your underlying code or algorithm so we can ensure that they comply with cybersecurity regulations. We have new data governance laws for data security and personal information. We have international entity registration laws, and a host of other things. Jackie, I'm interested in hearing your experience in doing some of these things, which maybe at first glance you're thinking, we're Young Living, we're doing essential oils. I'm not going to get caught up in these kinds of things, but my guess is some of these things are going to apply to everybody.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially I think all industries, but even EC industries that are not in the negative list from the China government. Is like all these regulations that you mentioned, right? Brand new regulations came up, some of them last year, and I think it's like a common practice in China. Like they issue a regulation, but they're very vague, and I think they do that on purpose because that's how they explore. They see how companies are taking advantage or no, or how they're acting with the implementation. If they don't like something, they come and find you. And it is difficult for companies to kind of learn how to navigate those, right? Fortunately, I feel like with some of these regulations, for example, the personal information, they copy something similar to the GDPR. So at least a lot of companies that had already implemented something like that because have business in Europe or even here in California with the CCPA, a lot of the work that they did can be leveraged, but it's still, right, you have to go in and they expanded the application of those laws to even cover cross-border or expansion of that information outside of China. So even if you're not doing business in China, but if your business has a touch point in China, you have to comply with those regulations. And the fines are very hefty. And there are companies that are already getting fined. They don't even know why. They just, because the authority really just determine whatever they think and they feel is a violation, they will come and get you.
Yeah. No, thanks for adding that color. I mean, the other thing too, and I mean, this is something that I worried about quite a bit when I was at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, are what I would call unfair trade practices, which not only affect our domestic economy and undermining some of the things we're trying to do domestically, but even operating in China, right? I think everybody knows that the Chinese government, both at the federal level and subcentral, provides a lot of subsidies for their companies. A study came out maybe 2 weeks ago from CSIS, and it was called Red Ink was the name of the study, and it tried to quantify the subsidies. And their finding, which was in their own words a vast underestimate, was that China is subsidizing its companies to the tune of $250 billion a year, right? And that's like direct subsidies. That's not like state-owned funds that are buying up and investing in companies as a state-owned fund, right? These are direct subsidies. Jeremy referred to Made in China 2025, and I actually brought this book, and I'm pretty sure Jeremy gave me like 5 years ago, that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce put together. For those of you who haven't heard of Made in China 2025, Go look it up. Okay, really, go look it up. This is essentially a program or a plan that China has announced that they've selected a number of industries, sectors, where they intend to be the world leader, right, by 2025, which is in 3 years. And it covers, advanced technology, it covers aircraft. So when we talk about, and Jeremy, you mentioned this, that China's a great market for aircraft, for all these different things. I mean, if they have their way with Made in China 2025, I mean, are those markets going to be there? I mean, I would kind of ask you, Jeremy, to comment a little bit on what do these kind of general approaches, whether it's subsidies, Made in China 2025, forced technology transfer, how does that affect the competitive environment in China for non-Chinese companies doing business there?
Yeah, so again, I think it really depends on the sector. Some Chinese policies, some Chinese subsidies are more impactful than others. China's more advanced in some sectors than it is in others. Obviously, picking off 10 sectors, which is, a massive chunk of the Chinese economy of any global economy, to be, world beaters, to have to set localization targets, to satisfy domestic demand with domestic production. Obviously you can't do all of it at once. But obviously China has had some successes, for sure. I think what I would say is that multinationals today, but also I think many who aren't multinational in the sense that, they're smaller and medium-sized companies but have built successful businesses either exporting to China or in China, are very aware, for the most part, of the risks of doing business and the changing regulatory environment. Obviously, companies continue to make mistakes. Some of them are unforced. Some of them do not avail themselves of the best resources, whether it's law firms, accounting firms, banks. You mentioned banks. Obviously, the chamber, we're here to help. Organizations like, here in Utah can help. U.S. China Business Council and others, AmChams. So there are a lot of resources to help companies understand the risk and mitigate the risk. In terms of, obviously, the risks that China presents to certain industries, that risk is a serious issue for discussion in many, many boardrooms. Obviously, you always have to balance the opportunity that China presents with the growing risks in some areas that China presents. And I think what is a myth is that companies don't take those risks very seriously. Companies devote enormous resources to protecting their intellectual property. They are very strategic today about what they bring to China. In many instances, they've always been strategic for many companies about what they bring to China and what they don't bring to China. I would say today, for many companies, the China Plus One strategy, because of some of the policies that you just alluded to, in particular the data policies. I mean, I think China's not just moving forward with GDPR; it's GDPR plus. Okay, and so if you're a company that is heavily reliant on data, obviously you have to really consider kind of the risks with regard to China's data regime, which are not yet clear. I mean, there's a lot of ambiguity around what China's doing, but the overall shape of what we're seeing is not encouraging and worrisome.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I want to talk, I'm going to ask one more question before we move on to like the new realities of like post-COVID. What does Russia and Ukraine mean for China? And it's about Chinese consumers. And you kind of alluded to this, Jeremy, when you said you got to make sure your product like is responding to Chinese demand. And Jackie and Darin, I'd be interested in hearing, how do Chinese consumers feel about U.S. brands? Versus the competitiveness of Chinese companies, rising tensions. I've seen in China, if there are, if you have some place like Korea that takes some action or says something that Chinese authorities don't like, you'll see these massive boycotts, right, of Korean materials. We've seen the same thing happen with Japan and that kind of thing. And Japan's a good example. Japan doesn't always love to have U.S. products, right? Even if we're able to open those markets, they don't always want U.S. products. So what's your sense, Jackie, if you want to comment on that, and then
yeah. So my experience has been like they love American products because they love the quality. Right here we have all these standards for whatever industries, GMPs and all these certifications that you require. So they love the products and they don't mind paying high price for those products either. It's just a matter of how we bring them to them, right?
Yeah, no, I agree.
I think the risk is, because the people get their information through their media, and they could have a skewed view of who we are as Americans and what we do as Americans. I mean, we're on the news. The American information's on the news like 24 hours a day. I mean, they're always talking about America, and most of the time not in a great light. So I think there's become a little bit more of nationalism going on that's concerned me. They're a little bit more nationalistic, a little bit more, I'm not saying anti-American, but it's a nationalism moving in China that I didn't see before. But as far as U.S. products go right now, I mean, you can see they boycotted the NBA, right? Because of a few comments about Hong Kong and I'm not a sports guy, so the guy from Turkey.
Yeah, NS Freedom.
No,
that's right.
His name now.
Houston
NS
Rockets, generally.
Yeah, and so they lost. I don't know. I don't remember what they said. Do you remember how much they said they lost? But it was a ton of money.
Yeah,
But the point is they're using that, and the people get behind it a little bit more than they used to. But with saying all of that, when it comes to food, they know American food is regulated properly. They know that corners aren't being cut, so they know what they're buying is quality. Okay, because we have that reputation as Americans. But I think the risk is I see a little bit of nationalism going on.
Yeah. No. Thanks for those insights. Let's talk a little bit about what's happened just over the past few months. I mean, obviously over the past few years, we've had significant changes. We have tariffs on Chinese products. We have export controls that are more stringent on what you can actually send to China. You have scrutiny on investments, cross-border investment. But even on top of all of that, over the last few months, we've had China's approach to zero COVID, right, where they're shutting down some of their major industrial centers in an effort to have zero COVID transmission rates. It's resulted in supply chain disruptions. We have China giving strong rhetorical support for Russia's war in Ukraine. I mean, no one has a crystal ball, but I mean, Jeremie, what do you think the impact of this is going to be? I mean, is this going to be a situation where, okay, the lockdowns end and then everything kind of springs back to normal, or do you think that this is going to have a longer term impact?
Yeah. So I think things are very much in a state of flux. I think Damien Ma, who was on the panel this morning at Paulson Institute, did a nice job highlighting, the compelling nature of, China's growth and where China is in terms of per capita income, where China is in terms of building out various things, and where Chinese demand. There's just a lot of running room for the Chinese economy to continue to grow, and those. And all those other things that China has done right that I led off with in terms of infrastructure and the talent and so forth, all those things remain in place. But obviously we are seeing, I think, mistakes to the point that you just made about nationalism. I think China felt very good, and Chinese people were very proud of how, and certainly the Chinese leadership, very proud about how they handled COVID over the first couple of years. But obviously, a policy of vaccine nationalism has not served the Chinese, people or the Chinese economy very well, as it turns out, right? And as variants have evolved, it's just much harder to keep out an Omicron than it is. And so, I think there's considerable worry that there isn't that China is doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on dynamic zero COVID. And that the lockdowns that you've seen may turn into some kind of, rolling, right, lockdowns or periodic lockdowns. Obviously Beijing did a better job than Shanghai. Shenzhen did a better job than Shanghai. But obviously, even a Beijing style sort of lockdown that doesn't run the same duration and isn't as chaotic, is enormously damaging to the economy, and to business. And so I think, I think the world would like to see, and certainly the EU Chamber has been very vocal on this, the American Chamber in China, all of the American AmChams in China have been very vocal on the desire to see something, a strategy, to see the Chinese government put in a strategy in place that isn't just about dynamic zero COVID. And obviously, if you look at the surveys that the EU Chamber has done, that AmCham have done, obviously a big hit to business confidence in China. There's no question about it. In many sectors, not all, but in many, they've hit the pause button. I think I mentioned earlier, sort of China plus one strategy is kind of on afterburners for many companies right now. That is, they're going to continue to do business in China. We're not hearing about companies pulling out of China, for sure. But many companies are looking to diversify now, because there are questions. There's obviously the COVID questions in terms of how China's managing that, but also what's happened in the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, where you've seen companies overnight, major multinationals have to leave, many, sometimes multi-billion-dollar investments on the table, just pick up and leave overnight. Because of what Russia has done. And obviously, when you look at a geopolitical environment, you have Taiwan, which was talked about this morning, you have South China Sea and so forth. The risks are real. I mean, these are not things that are abstract. And so, we're spending a lot more time talking to our members. Our members are coming to us and saying, well, I'm hardly a Taiwan expert. There are other people who do that work much better than we do. But we have to know something about it. We have to know enough about it to counsel companies, and also, to explain what the risks are, and also to be able to steer them in the right direction, because you have to know these risks and then be comfortable with them in terms of your business strategy.
Thanks. So I mean, and you raised the question, Jeremie, which is, well, what does the risk mean for companies? Do you have to change your strategy? Do you move? Do you have another supply chain? I mean, I advise folks where, some haven't changed too much. Some have a duplicated supply chain running through Indonesia or Southeast Asia. Maybe they're moving to Mexico. And in some cases, they're coming back to the United States. Jackie, I'd be interested in hearing, strategically, do these kinds of risks, prompt a company in your position to kind of rethink its strategy?
Yeah, for sure. In the case of Young Living, for example, we did have to reassess our strategy, especially we have business, we had a legal presence in Russia. So we had to do that consideration, right? And now thinking in the future, do we want to kind of have to go through the same nightmare again? What to do with all customers in something were to happen with Taiwan. So we did reassess our strategy, and fortunately, I think companies can determine the level of investment, and most important, the level of legal presence that you can have in China. So right now, China has this cross-border e-commerce that don't require a zero legal presence for a company. Foreign companies can go as soon as you utilize in third-party logistics that are approved, or platforms you're selling your consumer goods, for example, online, like Taobao, WeChat, or those sort of platforms. And we can just ship our products, and third parties handle the whole operation, right? We don't have to go there. If we want to taste the waters first, see how things go as we work into getting permits, how difficult we'll get to get licenses, etc.
Thanks. We're going to open it up for questions here in a second. Since I'm the moderator, I get the last word. And I'm just going to say on this, I hope you've all seen that it really becomes, I think, a sectoral analysis. I mean, my own view, sitting from where I was in the government, from where I am now, is if you're in a high-tech sector, if you're in one of the sectors that's pointed out here, it's going to be hard to do business, okay? And you can, right? But you have to worry about export controls. Some things you're just not going to be able to send over. You have to worry about companies who have any connection to the government or the PLA ending up on a sanctions list where you can't do transactions with them. So that's challenging. But I mean, we're always going to have trade with China, right? I mean, I'm as hawkish as anybody is on China, but we're always going to have trade with China, right? I mean, even at the height of the Cold War, we were trading with the Soviets. We were sending wheat over there. And so, I mean, I think folks in sectors that, that we have here at the table, I think you're going to continue to have a lot of real opportunities. But I think as you go to each sector, you have to think really carefully about what your risk and reward profile is.
Can I just make one follow-up point?
I said I had the last word, Jeremy.
All right.
No. Please do.
No,
Please do.
I mean, I would just say I agree to a degree, but again, every sector and sometimes even within sectors is going to be a different dynamic. If you're doing 5G, 6G, technology, if your business is to do R&D and to come up with cutting edge, R&D based technologies in that space, most of the companies you're going to need to license to are in China. That's just a reality today. And so you're going to need, if you want to stay competitive, if you want to be able to support your R&D here in the United States, if you want to stay globally competitive, including with Chinese companies who have, some of which have massive scale, you're going to have to be able to do business. And it's actually in many instances it's in the U.S. interest, to have those exports going to China, so that we're able to stay, our companies are able to stay at the cutting edge. Similarly, if you're an auto company, you look at where we are on battery technology today and where China is, and things like critical minerals and access, and obviously the largest auto market in the world. It's just not something you can forego if you're an auto, and agriculture has its own imperatives as well. So it's really very, I think it's not as just simple as, the risks are really high and we need to pull out. I mean, obviously I think it's clear the risks are increasing, but the opportunity is still compelling for many. And there's a way and sometimes an imperative need to do business, and you have to come up with ways to do that business while complying with U.S. law, always adhering to your principles and your values. We haven't talked about human rights and those kinds of issues, but those are very real as well. So
I was just going to make one comment, Jeremy. When they say leaving China, well, China's not Russia. You can leave Russia and not destroy your balance sheet. You cannot leave China without destroying your entire balance sheet. I mean, it's a bigger move.
That's the difference between an $18 trillion economy and a $1.7 trillion economy.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, it won't happen. And it's no surprise that these guys double down on their COVID either. I mean, it's Asian culture, and the Communist Party will not lose face, all right? So eventually they'll figure out a way or a science thing to get rid of the zero COVID policy, hopefully sooner than later. But they also have to manage their own people, right? I mean, we had people in their homes. They couldn't leave the door of their homes for 65 days. We were doing conferences with them online, on Teams, and you could see it in their faces. They have to, at some level, even though they're a dictatorship or whatever you want to call the regime that's over in power right now, they have to please their people to a point too, right? I mean, it's not, and so they want good press.
Thanks. Questions?
Okay, cool. So that's really loud, sorry. In terms of e-commerce, I think that's a way in a lot of countries to kind of get around regulatory requirements. Do you see any indications for China that could be more heavily regulated, so that if you were to be relying on e-commerce as a large source of business in China, is there a risk that could go away?
Yeah, I think it's a risk. So this pilot that they created with a list of products that you can ship without having to go to registration, so even have to go to China FDA, it was launched in, I believe, in 2017 or 2019, and it was good for only a couple years. So they've been extended it. But that means that at any point, they might come back and say, it's done. So we're not allowing this anymore. Everything has to go through the proper registration. So it's a risk, for sure.
So what is your experience with Chinese individuals and or companies investing in U.S. businesses and the potential risk there?
Yeah, let me speak to that a little bit. There's an agency called the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States. It's not really an agency, it's what it sounds like. It's a committee. It's chaired by the Treasury Department, and other agencies sit on it. Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, and others. And it is a system that has been strengthened in recent years. And the idea is that if you have what they call a foreign person, which is like foreign money, a foreign entity, and they're going to come and buy a U.S. business, if there is a national security risk, then the parties to the transaction are supposed to go on their own volition. They're supposed to go to the committee, which we call CFIUS for short. They're supposed to go to CFIUS and say, here's a transaction we want to do. We're bringing it to your attention because it may have national security implications. Maybe the business has high tech. Maybe it's a building that's close to a military facility. Maybe it's something in critical infrastructure, the power grid, something like that. And we want to show you that we've taken steps to mitigate, the control that this foreign money might have over the operations of this business. And it becomes, an opportunity for the government to assess it. And if they think that the parties to the transaction have done a good job in mitigating any risks, then they'll clear that transaction and the parties don't have to worry about that again. Sometimes they'll look at it and say, actually, we're pretty worried about this, and what we want to do, we want to put an independent board member on that board who has some national security experience to make sure that there's supervision. Sometimes they'll say, you can do this transaction, but you have to spin off this facility in Ohio because they make classified materials there, right? Or something that's used for our weapon systems. And that's the kind of thing they'll do. When it comes to risk, it's going to be based on where's the money coming from, right? So if it's coming from Canada, like a lot of our private equity investors, that's super low risk, right? It's Canadian. If it's coming from China, that's the highest risk. If the target is, some kind of services company or hotels or something like that, depending on where they are, that might be really low risk. If it's a semiconductor company, don't even try, right? So it's really based on what's the national security risk. And if you don't go to this committee and get pre-clearance and you do something that has high risk, this committee can come back and unwind that transaction and force a divestment and a fire sale, right? They can unwind it. So it's incumbent on folks where if you think that the business you're selling, U.S. business, has some kind of critical infrastructure, critical technology, proximity to military facilities, and you're having foreign money, it's probably in your interest to go to the committee and say, hey, can you clear this? Otherwise, you could be at significant risk going forward. It's called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, CFIUS. Any other comments on that?
No, I just say they're really good people like Jamieson, but also others who can help you understand your risk. If you're looking at a transaction and you want to know, do you think this would raise concerns of CFIUS? You can get, there are a lot of experts. Jamieson is, he and other people in his practice who spend a lot of time doing that for business. And, we can certainly give an informal advisory view on it too, but I just think there are a lot of resources out there is what I would say for companies to navigate that issue.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have any crystal ball on 301 tariffs?
Here's are there any reporters in here? Is there media in here? So
You're a couple years late.
So here's my sense on 301 tariffs, okay? For those of you who aren't aware, Section 301, I talked about earlier, we found a bunch of unfair trading practices in the area of forced technology transfer. The U.S. response was to put tariffs on over $300 billion worth of imports from China. When those were put in place, most of those tariffs at the beginning were focused really on high technology items, and sometimes things that China doesn't even send to us yet, right? Things like from here. And then as China retaliated, it expanded to other things, and now it's kind of status quo. During the Trump administration, there was what we call an exclusion process, where a company could go, notionally could go to the government and say, hey, I can't get this from anywhere else. I've been trying to resource it to the United States or from other trading partners, and I just can't get it. Can I get some time to keep bringing this in? If not, I can't do my expansion. I'll have to fire people. And in some cases, the government would say, okay, you can do that. The Biden administration has not had an exclusion process. There's been a significant pressure to do an exclusion process. The Senate of the United States has now a bill before it saying, USTR, the agency in charge of this, you will have an exclusion process. And by the way, you're going to give away exclusions very liberally. And the current bill, at least in my view, others might disagree, is probably too liberal and in fact undermines 301 as a general matter. But what you have going on this summer, you have three things going on, right? You have the bill, which I just talked about. You have USTR, who's doing a required review of the tariffs, right? That's happening. And then thirdly, you have the U.S. International Trade Commission, which is a bipartisan commission, independent, also themselves doing a review generally of the Section 301 tariffs, as well as the Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. So you have these three things going on right now, and you have a lot of political pressure to do something about tariffs, but you also have an election coming up, and no one wants to look soft on China, right? So you have all these like really kind of nuanced things happening. I mean, my own sense is at some point, I mean, maybe an exclusion process is going to pop out of this, because USTR doesn't want to be forced to do it by Congress, but it is a safety valve and has been. So, I mean, I think we want to watch this summer, those three processes, what people are saying, because there's going to be hearings, right? There's going to be, with the USTR review, there's going to be opportunities for people to comment, and it's going to be out there, and the administration will have to answer questions about it and decide what they're going to do.
Can I just make one additional?
Yeah.
Or two. One, I just say I'm really impressed with the shelf life of our report. I'm glad it's getting so. But more seriously, I think everything Jamieson said, I agree. I think where we're headed, sort of medium term on tariffs, is a strategic kind of reorientation or recalibration of the tariffs. I think that's going to take some time. This administration has moved rather slowly on China. That's no secret. Obviously, the environment has become even more complicated because of what's going on with Russia, and so I think things that might have happened more rapidly are perhaps going to evolve more slowly. But nonetheless, I think the forecast is for probably lower or no tariffs on things that that are of no, that American consumers buy, and where really there's no strategic value associated with that tariff, right? And people have talked about bicycles and other things, and then I think you're going to have probably in the much higher tariffs perhaps on a smaller number of imports that are more strategic in nature. But I think that may take time, but we'll see. James.
So I think that outcome, it kind of presumes that the administration is going to come to agreement internally, which is like super hard in any administration. In this one, it seems to be particularly difficult. So I think it's going to be hard to come with that outcome. Yes, sir.
Is there any risk at sourcing parts or sourcing components and things from China?
Yes. There is, right? And it's not just, it's not just that the tariffs are going to probably be around for a while. It's the supply chain challenges we've seen going on right now. I mean, I have a lot of clients who, they have a bunch of things happening right now. They have a Section 301 tariff, right, on some of their goods. They have the COVID lockdown. They have supply chains and ocean freight, which can be incredibly expensive right now. And so all of these things are kind of like, well, this is making it not as economically optimal for me to source from China. But what a lot of these folks are doing is they're seeing things on the positive side of the ledger too, right? They're seeing the new NAFTA, which is the USMCA, where essentially we've said if you're sourcing from, there are rules in there that provide incentives to source from Mexico, right? So Mexico is an alternative to China. You have our Congress, and one of the things they've miraculously done, they passed a bipartisan infrastructure law where they say, if you're going to build a battery or a battery component facility in the United States right here, we will give you money. We'll pay for half of this thing. That's a big deal, right? And so I'm talking with folks right now who are looking into that. And so a lot of this sourcing, you're going to be able to source from China. You do have risks to the extent you need an alternative. There are things in the works where you can go to Mexico. Some could come back to the U.S. Southeast Asia actually was a big winner from the China 301 tariffs. Princeton came out with a study that said, hey, Malaysia and some of these others were the big winners. So there are risks, but there are alternatives too.
Okay, we only have time for one more question, and if I may, I think I'm going to steal it.
Oh, okay.
Have you guys found, for those of you who have done business in China, that there are ways to build trust and mitigate risk in those relationships with your Chinese counterparts, or do you think because of the CCP's influence in the private sector, there's just a gap there that you can't build trust?
I think you can definitely build trust. I think relationships are relationships, and I think that you have dependable, good relationships with people, no matter where they're from, and specifically in China, I think it's not a problem at all. You can build a relationship of confidence and trust with people in China, no problem at all.
Yeah. Jackie?
No, the same, yeah.